Welcome to Great Taste. I'm your host, the boss. 60 minutes of deliciousness coming up. My guest on today's show is Kaki Okamura, author and illustrator of WA, The Art of Balance. Live actually healthier, happier, and longer the Japanese way. She also writes an email newsletter, which I encourage you to sign up for. You can do that at Kakikata, KAKIKATA.space. And before I actually let her join in on this conversation, I would like to say that WA, The Art of Balance, is a book everyone in the United States needs to read. Now, I feel confident enough that I have enough expertise, having lived here for 70 some odd years, to say that everyone in the United States needs to read it. Whether people in other countries need to, I'm going to leave that up to other people and other countries' needs. But everyone needs to read this book because if you already think along the same lines as the philosophy and practical processes Kaki presents in the book, it will reinforce and broaden your understanding through the lens of Japanese culture. If most or all of what she presents is new to you, get your highlighter out and use it. Take notes, and most of all, incorporate the priceless knowledge she communicates into your lifestyle. You'll live happier, healthier, and longer because of practicing WA, the Art of Balance. So now, Kaki, welcome to the show.
Oh my God, thank you so much. It's I was so excited to hear that you invited me onto the show, and it's really an honor. So thank you for that lovely intro.
Well, it's really an honor for me to talk with you because I feel so excited. It's rare, honestly, that I encounter someone. I read your email every week, and I enjoy it so much. And it's so thrilling to have somebody talking about these things and putting them in a way that practically can benefit anyone who takes advantage of listening or reading and incorporating into their daily lives the messages that you describe. So why not, let's just start right at the beginning. What is WA, the Art of Balance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in the beginning, I really struggled with coming up with a title. Because as you know, I write a lot about Japanese practices, but it's not necessarily about, like all Japanese people live this way and everyone in Japan's healthy. That's not it. But it's about drawing on, ideas, traditional Japanese ideas and ways of thinking and value systems, and how applying those can actually really benefit our health. And, Japanese values, you'll see certain trends in Japan, but this doesn't necessarily mean, everyone in Japan's healthy. But as I was thinking about this, I felt like I came across, the kanji wa, and I felt like it really captured this book really well. If you know a little bit of Japanese, you'll know wa is a word used to describe Japanese things. So washoku, Japanese food. Washi is Japanese paper, wafuku is Japanese clothing. And so this kanji wa is used to describe Japanese things, but it's also the Japanese character for harmony. And so, or you can also say it represents peace, but I think it really ties in this idea of, it's not necessarily that all Japanese people are healthy, but pulling from these values of Japanese culture on balance, harmony, thinking of ourselves within a larger system and not super independently, and ways that thinking in those terms can actually benefit our own well-being. So that's kind of where the Art of Balance comes from.
We could spend, I think, the entire hour or more talking about different kanji characters, because it's amazing as you describe them in the book, the different characters and the depth of understanding and meaning and layers that go into them. So as you can see, I'm fairly excited talking with you. So could you read I know you went over it a little bit just now, but could you read just a couple of paragraphs from the book to give people a good basis as to what we're going to be talking about? And what I mean by that is that you in the book, you base the entire book on 4 pillars. These 4 pillars are nourish, move, rest, and socialize.
Yes. If anyone reading this has the book, I can pull a paragraph from page 11, but yeah, to just describe what it means. This is wa, or the art of balance. Wa is colloquially recognized as a character to describe Japanese things. Washi is Japanese paper. Washoku is Japanese food. Wafuku is Japanese traditional clothing. But its meaning was derived from the idea of harmony, the simultaneous combination of different factors in our life that together can create a beautiful sum. In this way, when I describe how to live healthier the Japanese way, it's less about a Japanese lifestyle, but is about principles that are rooted in a lot of Japanese culture and tradition. The belief that to live well is to live in balance. At the end of the day, a healthy lifestyle is not about eating vegetables or getting enough exercise, but it's about investing in a lifestyle that allows us to live out our most meaningful and fulfilling lives. It's a sustainable mindset that allows us to do the things we love with the people we love in a way that empowers and inspires us daily. It promotes independence, freedom, and strength, but is also mindful of empathy, curiosity, and joy. We can embody these values and find true lifelong health when we discover a lifestyle balance with our 4 pillars.
All right. So now that you set that up for all of us, can you give us some insight as to what is your essential discovery story that led you to write this book?
Yeah, I would say it's actually a bit of a personal story, but a bit of background about myself. I was actually born in the United States, and I was there until around middle school. But then in middle school, I moved to Tokyo and I moved to Japan. And when I was growing up in the US, I actually grew up overweight. I, as a child it feels a little more complicated because, the way we approach food, I think, is very sensitive. We're in a part of our lives where, you're still forming your own identity. But growing up in the US, when you grow up overweight, people tell you, oh, you gotta eat more vegetables, you gotta exercise more, you gotta eat more fruits, which is all true, but the narrative also tends to be very extreme. And so, there's a lot of fad diets of like, okay, you gotta go fat free, you gotta go carb free. Red meat is, gonna give you cancer, or sugar is gonna kill you. Like, it feels very extreme. And, when you're told to eat healthfully, you're like, okay, I gotta do it 180. I gotta only eat salads. I gotta work out every day. And I think in the US, there's a prevalent mindset of like, taking things to the extreme, go big or go home. I think that approach also applies to health a lot of the time. And so what I noticed when I moved to Japan is that, Japan is a society where there are not that many overweight people. I think the obesity rate is like 4 or 5%. It's really low. But despite that, there isn't like a huge, like, intense health or fitness culture. I think it's relatively rare to find people using the lunch break to work out. I don't think people speak of like dieting in the same way. But people are, relatively leading really healthy, long lives. And when I kind of observed what the people around me were doing, it wasn't so much that they're cutting out, bread or rice or sugar and whatnot, but there's a lot of values around moderation. So if you go out to a restaurant in Japan, portions are a lot smaller. I also found exercise to be more integrated into one's lifestyle. And, I think thinking about physical health, moving to Japan, it did really improve my well-being in that way. But I found that as I focus more on my physical health, what I realized is that it's really important to focus on your like mental well-being or spiritual well-being as well. And thinking about, ways to rest. And I take on a little of an interesting perspective when it comes to defining rest in the book. It's not simply like, okay, how to sleep better or how to, taking breaks during the day, which is important, but I define rest as how to re-energize, how to find more energy. And so I think this is where I really lean into the importance of curiosity, or the importance of feeling like you can make mistakes and being able to explore. And I think, you'll realize that a lot of the times, if you're passionate about something, you can spend hours working on it. That's really, I think that's a form of rest, because it's really re-energizing and you feel, more alive. And then with socialize, I think as I was doing more research on health and well-being, I did a lot of reading on blue zones, which are specific areas of the world where people live really long lives. And of course, they eat well, exercise, but something else is that they have really good social connections with their community. I think a lot of longevity studies also kind of realize this, is that healthy people also have good friends and good families close by to them. So, when you talk about health, I think it's important to know that they don't live they're it's all connected. If you're stressed, you might stress eat. If you're bored, you will stress eat. If you don't eat well, it's hard to sleep. And if it's hard to sleep, it's hard to exercise. So everything's connected. And really trying to understand how we can balance all things without doing anything to the extreme, but also making sure that we are paying attention to all aspects of our health.
Mm. And just to help people understand a little bit about the way you've compiled the information in the book, with these 4 pillars, nourish, move, rest, and socialize, you integrate these different Japanese principles that we're going to talk about some of them. But in addition to that, you use a lot of research in the book where you refer to meta studies that have been done, where the different principles that you're expounding have been essentially verified in terms of lifestyle changes. And I think that is that's a key ingredient, pardon that, in the sense that it's not just, oh, she's pontificating, but really, oh, wow, here's this principle, and this study, and we'll get to a couple of them, but this study actually corroborates, what Kaki is writing about, and the principle that she's referring to, which maybe is 3,000 years old, that originated in Shintoism or whatever. So I think that's a really important aspect of the book. So letting people know that that's part of it. It's not just a philosophical treatise.
Yeah, no, I think when it comes to things around health, research is very important. Of course, there are a million anecdotal stories, but being able to back it up, I felt like was something important for this book.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've touched on the 4 pillars a little bit, but let's explore them just a little bit more. So when we're talking about nourish, and most of that chapter is really focused on food and eating, and you bring up several principles that I think we all would either, if we haven't heard them before, we need to hear. The first one is 80% of your stomach, which I'll let you explain in Japanese how to say that and what it means. And you mentioned already portion sizes, but there are a couple other things too that I wish that you'd go into, and that is the tableware and what that has to do with portion sizes, how it's connected. Everything is connected, as you said, and the variety and food combinations.
Yeah. To just start off with that first idea, 80% full in Japanese is called hara hachibunme. And it literally means like 80% your stomach, but it's kind of like this old saying of, eat 80% full, you'll live well. And the idea is that 80% is when, you would feel satisfied after a meal, and, you don't feel like you need to eat more, but you're not at 100% where you feel super full, overstuffed, and can't even take another bite. And I usually use this as like one of my first intro topics for a lot of people, because it's really something anyone can incorporate. And I think when it comes to healthy eating, yes, we need to eat vegetables, fruits, healthy whole grains and whatnot. But you also want, like, your whole life doesn't need to be that, you can enjoy cake and you can enjoy desserts, snacks, steak, whatever you enjoy. You just want to make sure you're enjoying it in moderation. And so one way that a lot of people help, or one way that you can help practice hara hajibunme is kind of like you mentioned, the tableware. What you'll notice is that traditional Japanese meals are plated on, they're kind of smallish plates, they're single serving size. And a lot of times it'll be like single serving of rice, single serving of miso soup, a small plate of grilled fish is the traditional, but these days it might be chicken, it might be beef, but grilled plate of some sort of protein. And then you'll have like 2 vegetable side dishes. And so this setup is actually called ichiju sansai. So ichiju is like 1 soup, sansai is 3 sides. And so it's about like, okay, you get a variety of a lot of different things, not just, like different food types. So you have like rice as your carbs, fish as your protein, and then some vegetables. But it's also about trying to have variety in, taste. Also just food types, like having soup in a meal, I think, helps you enjoy things a bit more in a balanced way instead of having like 1 big plate of pasta or 1 big plate of meat, which I feel like can be common in some households. But the idea is that having a little bit of everything, you can enjoy a lot of different foods without becoming too bored by your meals.
And this practical approach, as you say, it works for varied lifestyles. And what there are 2 pieces of wisdom in addition to all the other wisdom that's in this particular chapter that I made note of. You wrote, maybe you can't change the world, but you can make it the way things are done and preferred in your own home. And that was especially speaking to cooking more at home and eating more home cooked meals. And then adding on to that point, cooking for yourself matters because it's about being in control of what goes in your body.
Yeah, I think something that it might be like a, what do you say, like a hard pill to swallow, but I think something that's really important for people to understand is that, okay, your health is not necessarily always your fault. Sometimes people grow up in environments where it's harder to find fresh food, or they feel like they don't have enough time for it because they have a stressful job. But even if your health is not necessarily your fault, it's always your responsibility. Like, you're the only person responsible for taking care of your health. No one else can make those food choices for you. No one else can exercise for you. And so it's really important to take responsibility for it. And while in ways, that can feel like a difficult truth to swallow, it's also really empowering once you realize, like, okay, I'm the only person who can do this, so I'm going to take care of myself. And just because you're responsible for it, I don't think it means it necessarily needs to be hard. I think in the book, I share a few tips and tricks for home cooking, or ways that you can think a bit more about the food you eat. But yeah, if you go out to a restaurant, or if you're always eating prepared foods, you will never get to control what you put in your body. Someone else is doing that for you. Whereas if you take time to cook at home, like, exactly what you're eating. Just some quick tips to share. One of my favorite ones is relying on kitchen appliances that help. My favorite one is the rice cooker.
We're going to bring that up.
It's so, people think I'm sponsored by like rice cooker companies or whatever because they talk about it so often, but I use it every day. Even as we speak, I have dinner going on, but it's basically like, what I'll do is I'll put in rice, but I'll also put in like a lot of vegetables. So I might cut up some carrots, onions, mushrooms are great, and then put in some protein. I usually do chicken, but you can also do fish. I close the lid, press the timer, and then it's done in like an hour. I'm doing like work on the side. So that's like a really hands-off way to cook. I know a lot of people love pressure cookers or slow cookers. Those also work really well. Another one is that healthy cooking can be convenient. I think a lot of people associate convenience as being unhealthy, but it doesn't need to be. I always tell people frozen vegetables, they're great. Let's say you usually make pasta for dinner. Instead of trying to reinvent your meal plan, you can take what you already make, throw in some frozen spinach, frozen peas, or whatever vegetable you like. Frozen edamame is also a great one, into your pasta just to add some extra vegetables. If you're making like a soup, throw in a can of tomatoes. Nothing wrong with that. Tomatoes are tomatoes. I think being able to rely on things like the microwave. I like to cook my eggs in the microwave sometimes. It actually works really well. I don't just throw it in there. There's like a specific way to do it, but yeah, being able to rely on things like that. You don't need to do everything by like the traditional way. I think relying on things that make things more convenient, if it helps you home cook, it's all worth it. So don't need to feel too overwhelmed by doing everything by like hand.
Before we move on to move, could you just explain this whole issue of indulgence? Because we have a very different idea in our society as to what that means than what you explained in the book.
No, of course. I think something I realized in the US is that indulgence is often associated with like number of calories. So, the sweeter something is, or the more decadent something is, or the more fatty, more calorie heavy, that's like indulgent. So when we think of indulgent foods, we think, okay, that's steak, that's ice cream, that's cake. Whereas I found that in Japan, if you ask people what indulgent foods are, they have slightly different responses. It will often include things that are more decadent, but it also includes foods that are very seasonally based. So fruits that are like, super ripe in season, that is seen as indulgent. I think also foods from like a very special region. So there are places in Japan where like the seafood is really great. In northern Hokkaido, the seafood is considered really good because it's really cold up there. The fish are fattier, and that idea of having fish from that region is like that's decadent food. And so thinking about like the locality of something, the seasonality, or even how something was raised, I think that adds to, the idea of this indulgent food. So not always associating something as, oh, it needs to be like calorie heavy to feel like a luxury item, but thinking about the seasonality of something is what makes something delicious.
And so that's a perfect segue into moving. If we've been indulging in whatever way we look at it, and the key phrase I think in this particular chapter is exercise we do not enjoy is exercise we do not continue.
Yeah. It seems super obvious, but it's really as simple as like, you can talk about the 101 benefits of going on a jog outside and why running is great for you. But if you hate running, like it really doesn't matter because you're not going to do it. Same goes with, the benefits of swimming or rock climbing or doing yoga. I, you can talk about these health benefits, but I often like to focus first on like, okay, what do you enjoy? Start from there. And I think everyone enjoys something. I know a lot of people think like, oh, I don't love exercise, but I really think it's the issue is that you haven't found something you enjoy yet. I think a great example is walking. Walking can be exercise. I think it makes a huge difference when you're spending your time in a car all day versus if you walk to go somewhere. And thinking about exercise as something that can be integrated into your lifestyle. So you don't need to dress up in workout clothes, go to the gym for an hour for that to be exercise. It can really be like, okay, I like gardening. Gardening's a lot of work. that can be your form of moving your body. So I think being really creative with, what you already enjoy and figuring out how to move your body in a way that feels sustainable to you is really important.
This is another point that has been corroborated in Dan Buettner's research in the blue zones. Not one, I'm sure you know this, not one of those groups that he uses to focus on that live to more people live to be over 100 years old, and they're still healthy and integrated into life, and active people. Not one of those groups exercises. The Okinawans, I think, garden a lot. That's what you just mentioned, essentially. And so I think that's an inspiring point for people, that you don't have to put on those workout clothes necessarily. If you like it, go for it. But for me, it struck such a chord, because you have a running story. I think you say something about, if I remember correctly, it was like, I've had lots of people tell me that they can't wait to do this 5K, and the next sentence is, I hate running.
Yeah.
And of course those things don't go together. And I remember I ran for 3.5 years. This is quite a long period of time ago. And one morning I just woke up and said, I'm not going to run anymore. And then the next sentence was, yeah, I didn't enjoy one day during those 3.5 years. Why am I doing this? and yet, depending upon our behaviors, we might have more of an obsessive type of personality. And so maybe we substitute, like for example, I substitute walking.
Mhm.
But at some point, even with walking, I realized that I was constantly referring to my watch, constantly looking at how long I'd been walking, how many calories I'd burned, all this type of stuff. And again, I reached this point where I was like, this is ridiculous. I just want to walk. I just want to enjoy myself. I turned it all off.
Yeah.
And how freeing that was. And now I can do more of the things that you describe in the book. I don't think this is in the move chapter now. I can't remember, or maybe it is, but I can't remember which chapter it's in, where you talk about, while you're walking, how about doing some forest bathing, for example, in the environment that you're in. And so I'm constantly, putting my hands on the trees and listening, and the birds are singing. And anyway, it's a beautiful thing to actually go within and realize, are we doing whatever it is because we enjoy it? Or are we doing it because somebody from the outside said, oh, you have to do it this way, or you must do this, that, the other thing? So, okay, enough of that.
No, but it's a great point. And I think something else I'd like to highlight is that, what you enjoy, like, your preferences change over time. So, at one point, maybe you really enjoy this one activity, but as you grow older, maybe you grow out of it. And so there's nothing wrong with that either, but to always continually check in with yourself, like, hey, do I enjoy this? Do I want to keep doing this? Is a great way to approach exercise.
Mm-hmm. So what's the joy principle? I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I guess I am going to. GU. I actually looked up how to pronounce it on Google, and GU was there, but it couldn't find Hompu, or however you say it.
Yeah. I think, the idea is just kind of, it's less about like doing what's prescribed of us and, trying to shake off like those expectations, but really just trying to find things that you enjoy, whatever feels good for you. I think a lot of the times we forget, but there aren't that many rules in life. Like, we can kind of do a lot that we desire without, consequence. But because there's a certain like pattern or expectation from, what the people around us are doing, it's easy to feel boxed in. But being able to kind of realize like, oh, there are no rules. Like, I don't need to exercise at the gym to exercise. I don't need to have a, bike at home to like move my body. There are so many different ways to do it. So yeah, really leaning into that idea of like, oh, I have a lot of freedom to explore, is what I was trying to highlight with that.
Okay. And you write, finding joy in movement is not just about activity, but in the environment in which we do it. And that's where you brought in the whole aspect of forest bathing, for example. But I thought something else that was extremely insightful in that particular chapter was this whole explanation about the kimono. And I wish you would just talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, so this one kind of touches on beauty standards and what we see as, our ideal bodies. I think a lot of people have complicated relationships with their bodies, and it's to no personal fault. I think especially with increase in social media and exposure to, these impossible expectations, a lot of people have this idea of what their body should be like. But when, and I feel this feeling too, but whenever I feel pressure, like, oh, my body doesn't look a certain way, I really like to think about kimonos. And where I'm going with this is that when you dress someone in a kimono, the ideal way that they look is like a tree trunk. Like you want them to look super straight and flat. And the idea is that this kind of shape allows you to really enjoy the design and the pattern on the dress the most. It's what allows the dress to look really well, and then how to make that person feel the best in it. The focus is not on the body. Like you really want to hide the body shape and really just focus on this kimono. And, it's a lot of like color coordination, pattern coordination, thinking about like kimono designs are a lot of it's inspired by nature. So thinking about the season and how to match the season with the colors, and the kind of sense that it evokes. And so, when I think about like reflecting on the kimono kind of helps me think like, okay, when I, wear something, I want to really focus on like how that piece of clothing makes me feel. The focus is not on the body, but really like, okay, yeah, just how you feel in something. And you don't need to, yeah, be too focused on external appearances to feel good.
So the next pillar is rest, and you talked about that a number of minutes ago, expanding the scope of that term and not looking at it just like I'm taking a nap or I'm going to bed. At this particular time I need this amount of sleep, but the definition that you suggest is it's engaging in an activity that allows one to feel refreshed or recover strength.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the Japanese word and characters as far as the visual for that.
Oh yeah. So if you, I think it's the same for Chinese actually. I'm not totally sure, but the character for rest is, it's like tree with a person next to it. And so this visual is this idea of rest, happens under a tree. And under a tree, how do we feel? We feel at peace, we feel safe. We're under the shade, it's quiet. And so the idea is that rest doesn't actually happen in a vacuum. It's not like we can close our eyes and feel at rest, but it's really like, okay, our environment matters. Feeling safe matters. And so, yeah, when I talk about rest, I also talk about ways in which we can create that sense of safety, create that sense of like, okay, how, like a peaceful environment.
And that also means slowing down, being curious, you write, and paying attention to
Yeah.
your environment. And you make another observation that I really related to, and that is this your whole written exposition about resilience.
Mm.
And I wish you would talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, I think, especially when it comes to personal health, there's so much on like, oh, you just need willpower. Oh, you just need more motivation. But there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. There's a lot of like the feeling that's a personal failure if you are not resilient. But I like to kind of take on a perspective of resilience, which isn't like the lack of failure, but being able to kind of accept things not going the way you intended. I think, to give a really concrete example, like let's say you made a resolution to go to the gym. You're like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week this year. That's your New Year's resolution. February comes around and you're like, oh, I'm not going to the gym 3 times a week. And I think most people in that situation would feel really bad. They're like, oh, I'm a failure. I didn't go to the gym. Why don't I have the motivation? Why don't I have the willpower to just work out? But really, it's about thinking of like, okay, that didn't go as intended, but that's fine. And then shifting your perspective and being like, okay, the gym is not for me. That's not the way I like to exercise, but I can find something else I enjoy. And so the resilience really comes from taking that sense of like, things didn't go your way, but I'm going to try something different. I'm going to be flexible. I think that's really important. And being that curious mindset also comes into play in the idea that I like to refer to the kind of like a playful childlike mindset. If a kid, kids don't think too much before they act, for better or for worse, but if they're at a playground, um, or there's so many things to explore, they're not going like, oh, if I go on the swings, this might happen, that might happen. Oh, these are the consequences. They're not like thinking about it too much. They're like, oh, that looks interesting, I'm gonna go on that. And I think if we can also take on a more like playful, curious mindset, it can allow us to be like, okay, I'm going to just try something, see how it goes. If it doesn't go the way I like it, like I'll just like kind of turn around and do something else. I'm not going to dwell in that idea that things didn't go the way it planned. And so, yeah, resilience is less about, willpower, being like really mentally strong, but it's about, okay, can I be playful? Can I be curious? And can I be flexible?
And there are some other things that people can read about in the book. The book is Wa, the Art of Balance, Live Healthier, Happier, and Longer, the Japanese Way by Kaki Okamura, who happens to be my guest right now. And so I'm just going to mention these, but people can read the book. Part of the whole idea of understanding resilience is even monkeys fall from trees. You can think about that. Flexibility conquers rigid strength, and fall down 7, stand up 8. And we're going to leave it at that. As I said, you can read the book, but I would like you to speak a little bit about another element to rest that you introduce, which is spirituality. And I'd like you to explain to us what the kanji of thank you has to do with all this.
Yeah, I think the kanji for thank you is super interesting. Even as a Japanese person, I thought it was a very thoughtful character. If you look at the kanji for thank you, it is the combination of the words have, to have, and difficulty. So when you look at it, it kind of looks like to have hardship is thank you. And that feels really confusing. But when you do research on where this kanji came from, it was actually developed by Buddhist linguists on their perspective towards gratitude. And so the idea is that, to be able to say thank you is actually something very difficult to do, because there are so many different possibilities in the world, so many factors that come into play. And for a single event to happen, it needed to be like a miracle. And so the ability to say thank you is actually something very difficult to have, which is where this kanji comes from. And I think it really leads into the idea that, being able to practice gratitude, being able to see yourself in an environment that's not just yourself, but there's so many different things at play, I think allows us to feel, take on a different perspective towards things. For example, if, feeling gratitude towards food, it helps you be more mindful when you eat. It makes you see food less as like a number of calories, but a way to like nourish your body, a way to like have an interesting or nice experience. Food is also like ways we celebrate things. So being able to see it through that lens of gratitude, there are a lot of things that had to happen for that food to come onto your plate. When it comes to exercise, I think, exercise is a joy. It's something that it's to be honest, it's almost a privilege to be able to move your body. And I think being able to see exercise not as like, oh, I ate too much, I need to exercise it off, but being able to see like, oh, moving my body, that's a great experience. Being able to feel gratitude for that, I think actually allows us to, enjoy these acts a bit more and feel less stressed and tired out by it, but more energized by it as well.
And everything that you're saying, what I love about it is that it's really within everyone's reach, and the reach isn't too far because it's simply a change of perspective. That's all it is. Now, that could be more or less difficult for people depending upon cultural norms, depending upon how they were raised, all these different societal pressures, whatever. But the point is that it is really that simple. It's just a perspective change. Instead of looking at the glass half empty, it's looking at the glass half full. So that makes me feel good, and I hope it's inspiring everyone who's listening or watching us right now. We have one more pillar to cover, and that is socialize. And this is something that I love, the study that you wrote about, the Harvard study, and I think everyone needs to know about this.
Yeah, just like a short recap, I think there's a really interesting TED talk that you can watch, but it's like the longest longest longevity study. But they follow these group of people for many years of their lives, and they actually went in generations after as well. But following these people, they're trying to understand like, okay, who came out like the healthiest, the happiest, who like lived the best lives, and what did they do differently. And there's a lot of different factors that come into play, but one kind of single defining thing that they found as a very prevalent pattern is the quality of the relationship. So the higher someone ranked the quality of the relationships, the happier and longer they were likely to live. And I think that's a really interesting fact. There are other studies done on like loneliness, so kind of the opposite. People who felt lots of loneliness and ranked that very high, they actually did not do as well. And so I think thinking of our health in terms of, the health that social connections afford us, I think is also super critical.
Mhm. So what is asiatsu?
Oh, this is aisatsu. Very close.
Sorry. All right.
No, 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 no. But yeah, it's like one of those things in Japanese culture that some people think is like super unnecessary, and other people be like, this is so important. And my parents actually fell in that latter category. They thought it's really important. So I was really raised with this idea that it's very important. But also as a kid, I was kind of like, why do I even need to do this? But growing up, I realized the value in that aisatsu, to be in very simple terms, it's this idea of like greeting. So aisatsu is saying hello, good morning, good afternoon. In Japanese, there's actually a bit more in English that are common. So when you come home, you say tadaima. When you leave, you say ittekimasu. If someone comes home, you say okaeri nasai. If someone's leaving, you say itterashai. You might, it's just used not just in the home, but in the workplace, at school. If you go to like a Japanese public school, a lot of times like the headmaster or principal will still stand in front of the building. They'll say good morning to all the students. If you at a company, it's very common for people to kind of gather in a room very quickly and be like, say good morning to each other, kind of like morning announcements, and then start your day like that. And it seems like a really simple thing, but if you really think about, all your social interactions will start with a greeting. Your closest friends, the first words you've probably said to them was like, hello, or hey, nice to meet you, how are you doing? And those like that kind of small talk is actually really important. I think it's like you can be like the most socially awkward, introverted person, but the difference between saying like hello and versus not, I think makes a huge difference. And it does a few different things. It, it really acknowledges the other person, that they're in the room. If you just ignore them, you don't feel recognized. I think that is a huge loss in social connection, but just be like, oh, good morning, recognizing another person. It really opens the door to a conversation. Like, you can say good morning and it could end. That's like not the end of the world. But if you say good morning, it could lead to more interesting conversation. It could lead to more interesting interaction. You might get to know the other person better. Yeah, I feel like there's one more, but really the idea of ISETs is about being able to connect with someone else that, you don't need to have deep relationships with everyone in your life, but even these light relationships, I think have a really meaningful impact on the way we surround ourselves with other people.
You sum it all up with a beautiful sentence. It's lovely to watch the way someone else's face lights up when you greet them. That
Yeah.
it, it just made so much sense to me. And I loved it so much. Now, as part of this, you talk about the art of listening, you talk about the art of making someone feel emotionally better, you talk about sharing food as a part of that, and you talk about how there is a difference, a critical difference, I would say, in thinking about beyond the individual when you talk about socializing, thinking beyond the individual to the societal level. And I would really appreciate some insight into that.
Yeah, I think some people are a bit surprised when I bring this up, but I think it's really important to, or I think it's really helpful to think about Japanese culture in terms of it's a very collectivist society. The US is much more focused on the individual. It's about, exceptionalism and like, I am exceptional, I'm special. And I think there's a lot of value in that, but it also puts a lot of pressure on the individual. Like, you need to, like, everything, if things don't go your way, it's like a personal failure. But I think Japan is a bit more of a collectivist culture. You think about yourself within a larger framework, a larger society. Some really concrete examples. First one is 311. If you're not familiar with it, it's the triple natural disaster in Japan. So when there was the Tohoku earthquake, there's a tsunami, and then the Fukushima disaster, which was the nuclear power plant, which broke down. And, during this time, it's a really chaotic time for Japan. But instead of, lots of looting or, you know, lots of like, I don't know, protests or whatever, it was the prime minister at the time promoted this idea of jishuku, which is this idea of self-restraint. So restraining from going out, restraining from parties, restraining from using electricity because the power plants were down, in showing support and solidarity for those first responders or for the people who suffered. And then during coronavirus, so during COVID-19, when it first emerged, this idea of jishuku was also, resurfaced. So, and this time is, even more important that people self-restrain because, if you don't, like, people could die, you're spreading this virus. But the idea of, staying at home, staying quiet, not throwing parties, not protesting, just wearing masks, following the rules, I think had huge effects in the well-being of the country. And I think, in smaller, less serious scenarios, you go to like a soccer game in Japan, people will always clean up the garbage, really thinking about your space and thinking about how it affects other people. I think it helps, helps a person understand themselves in the context of other people, knowing that you have an impact on other people for better or for worse, and that, yeah, you have something to contribute to the wider whole. I think does a lot to improve your own well-being, but also others.
I love the story of the soccer match and people cleaning up after themselves, but I want to go back to the coronavirus. example, I'm actually trying to find those figures that you quoted. If you know them off the top of your head, I think they're so dramatic that it would be, it's worth repeating or letting people know about. Here it is, actually, I think. There's this whole idea of thinking about the society as a whole and looking at it as a responsibility, actually, as a person. As of writing in May of 2022, Japan's coronavirus deaths per million stands at 233.19. For comparison, the US stands at 2,995.28, and the UK at 2,574.71 per million. You're right, this isn't meant to be an evaluation of countries or cultures, but what I've seen in Japan has proven to me that a successful coronavirus containment doesn't mean having to give up personal freedom or liberty. There was no forced government lockdown or threatening fines for breaking social distancing rules, and Japanese citizens were allowed to continue to choose how they'd like to live their day to day, stay at home or go out, wear a mask or leave it at home. But the whole idea of this collectivism and that we are part of a larger group allowed people to realize that they could have a very strong impact, positive impact. And I think that's that's the key, is realizing that it's being a part of this particular society, and the whole idea that you're entitled, or nobody can tell you what to do, or whatever the strange notions are that people have. And as I said at the outset of the show, I feel I'm okay. I'm entitled to say it. I'm 72 years old. I can say what I want. I've lived here all my life. and it's beautiful to hear what concrete results came about from people having a larger vision of their place in society, that their place in society is, as an individual, attached to a collective. And that has a lot to do with, as you said, the whole idea of living healthier, happier, and longer. So
Yeah, I think the idea of, harmony, we don't exist in a vacuum. We exist with other people within a society. I think it's just really important to emphasize the idea of, there are multiple things at play, and we should see ourselves within a larger picture. And it has benefits not just for ourselves, but for society as a whole.
right. So I want to read one last thing from the book before I let you get in another word or two, if you have anything else that you want to say. Good health is not just about being concerned with eating vegetables or working out regularly or sleeping at a reasonable hour and spending time in nature. At the higher level, it's about paying attention to our health so that we can explore the world in ways that are most meaningful to us. We want to have quality time with our loved ones and travel to learn more about different cultures and ways of living. We want to explore and have adventures without being held back by our health, and have energy to be curious about the things that interest us. We want to eat good food and share drinks with close friends. But to do things, we need to realize that sometimes we must be comfortable doing the unhealthy thing as well. To occasionally enjoy dessert, eat fried foods, sleep late, or skip going on a run. Good health is about freedom and possibility, not restriction or rules. And the key to achieving this is understanding the art of balance. Now, I think most of those words were yours. My words were cutting off at the end, so I was trying to make sure that I substitute what seemed to be right. But I think we all get that idea. And the last thing is to approach our health with a balanced mindset, is to be empathetic of our humanness and the details that make ourselves and our lives unique. Instead of seeing choices as right or wrong, or to take on one extreme over another, enjoy the process of finding your unique middle ground and what works for you.
Yeah, I think I'm really glad you brought that up at the end, in that I would really love to highlight this to anyone who's listening, the importance of self-compassion. I think health, for some reason, has this very moral perspective where, doing something is wrong or doing something else is morally better or something. But it's not really about that. It's about, finding what works for you, finding what feels right for you. And yeah, going back to your goals in terms of, okay, being healthy is not about looking a certain way, fitting into a certain jean size. And it's not about just eating fruits and vegetables and exercising. Like those are healthy things, but healthy lifestyle is one that grants you all the opportunities that you want to pursue in life, helps you create those meaningful experiences with the people you care about. And so, yeah, carrying self-compassion within that journey, I think is super critical.
Tell people how they can interact with you more.
Yeah, I think the best way to reach me is join my email newsletter. I send out something every week. Um, I also read all my responses. So if you find something that you enjoy, shoot me an email afterwards. I will definitely see it. I try to respond to a lot of them. Another way is you can follow me on Instagram. It's also kakikata.space. And you can also find my writing on Medium. I post a lot of my writing work there.
Kaki Okamura has been our guest, my guest on Great Taste, Why the Art of Balance, Live Healthier, Happier, and Longer, the Japanese Way. And as I mentioned at the beginning, she also illustrated the book, and the illustrations are priceless. Kaki, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to Great Taste. I'm your host, Steve Boss, 60 Minutes of Deliciousness.